Today we're tuning into a video where Jim Caviezel is talking about what happened to kids over on Epstein Island. Now, throughout this video we're about to watch, he talks about many different people that we've covered right here on the channel. And when we get to those parts of the discussion, I'll make sure that I give you my opinions on that as well. But let's dive in and see exactly what he says happened to kids when they were over on Epstein Island. Now, we do know Jim Caviezel from a bunch of movies, and one of those, the biggest ones, is when he worked with Mel Gibson on Passion of the Christ.
Some things, once you hear them, you can never unhear.
Almost cried out Epstein Island. And I went, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're up against.
That one line, that one moment in a movie theater, that's what cracked it all open. Because Jim Caviezel wasn't just making a film, he was pulling on a thread, and what unraveled behind it involves some of the most powerful, most beloved names in Hollywood.
Now, I believe they're talking about that film Freedom that he did with Mel Gibson as well, that had to do with of kids.
Is just the beginning of this whole thing. It's an 8-armed octopus, and if you take just out, that arm will grow back. You have to take the head.
He's not talking about some fringe conspiracy. He's talking about a network, a system, with names attached to it. Names you know, names you trust, names that have been smiling at you from your television screen for decades.
Crazy.
You know they eat.
They eat. You know what she's about to say.
That is not
But we
bullshit.
did talk about Roseanne Barr. We have had multiple videos about her on the channel talking about what she felt Hollywood does.
It's true.
So it's not.
Let's start with who Jim Caviezel actually is, because before you can understand why what he's saying matters so much, you need to understand what it cost him to say it. This is not some anonymous whistleblower reading off a script in a room full of barking dogs. This is a man who played Jesus Christ on the biggest screen in the world,
Yep.
a man who was at the absolute peak of Hollywood, and then deliberately walked away from all of it to make a film that the entire industry tried to bury. Sound of Freedom is based on the true story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who left his career behind to personally rescue children from networks operating across Latin America and beyond.
The guys would come up and they would, right in front of us ask us if we wanted niñas or niños and little boys or little girls.
That's insane that this even exists, to be honest. I mean, all this is being exposed now because of the Epstein Files finally coming out. It's making a lot of eyes on this type of stuff, but it really, when you think about it, it's actually unbelievable.
That wasn't a scene from the movie. That was real life. That happened to Jim Caviezel and his crew on the ground in Colombia. In broad daylight, children being in front of a film crew like it was a market transaction. And when he came back to Hollywood with this film, a film about saving kids, the industry didn't celebrate him. They blacklisted him.
Everyone was told, from Rupert Murdoch, from Fox, to every studio, look, if you touch this thing, you will be out, you will be done.
And do you know why? The reason why Hollywood and the upper echelon, as I keep calling them, keep saying this stuff is because they're all involved. Let's be real.
You'll be finished in 3 years.
Read that back slowly. Every major studio, every major network, told, not asked, told, to stay away from a movie about rescuing children from and most of them obeyed. Why? That's the question Caviezel has been asking publicly for years, and the answer he keeps arriving at involves names, specific names, names like Oprah Winfrey. Names
Just spoke about Oprah Winfrey just 2 days ago on the channel. Went in depth about all the things that she was involved in. You could check that out if you want as well. But she's someone that I did not care for years, and now it's coming out that she was actually involved in the
like the circles that surrounded Jeffrey Epstein. And when you start mapping those names against what witnesses are now saying happened on that island and in private estates across America, the picture that emerges is one of the darkest things you will ever look at. Let's talk about the Epstein Files, because this is ground zero for everything we're about to unpack. When those documents were finally unsealed, the public expected a few familiar names. What they got was a sprawling list of celebrities, politicians, producers, and philanthropists.
Yeah, I think that when the files were exposed, as he said, they were expecting a couple of people. It's like half of Hollywood is involved in this stuff in some way. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but a lot more than any of us ever anticipated. And some names we would have never guessed.
People who had built entire public personas on being the good guys, the helpers, the humanitarians, And Oprah Winfrey's name appeared in those files not once, but 5 times. 5 times. Now here's where it gets layered, because Oprah's silence isn't new. Her silence is a pattern, and Jim Caviezel has been one of the few public figures with the platform and the courage to point directly at that pattern and name it for what it is. Think about the trajectory here. In 2007, Oprah opens a school for underprivileged girls in South Africa. It's praised globally. She's celebrated as a hero. And then, almost immediately, horror stories start leaking out.
Yeah, she's the hero that opens up this school that underprivileged girls over in Africa can get an education and have a future life. That's the facade that's being painted here. But really what was happening behind is these girls were being abused, and some of them even going missing to never be found. I wonder what actually happened to them.
Dormitory matron is arrested. 14 counts of indecent acts against underage students. A lawsuit follows. A settlement is reached behind closed doors. No public details. No real accountability. The matron is eventually acquitted on contradictions in witness testimony, and Oprah simply moves on. No investigation, no transparency, no answers for the families of those girls.
Because it seems that when you are someone that is at a higher tier of life, basically extremely rich, you don't have to follow the normal laws that the rest of us normal citizens have to follow.
It. Not a dollar has been wasted.
Not a dollar wasted. But what about the girls? What happened to them? Because sources close to the situation have spoken about missing students, about whispers on school grounds that nobody in power has ever officially addressed. And when you're a billionaire with the resources to find the truth, your silence isn't neutrality, it's a choice. And then there's Ellen DeGeneres, because her name didn't just surface in gossip circles.
No, we spoke about Ellen DeGeneres on multiple videos on the channel, and she's someone that I used to enjoy watching. I enjoyed watching her game show. I thought she was fun, but she's involved with not only Epstein, but also Diddy and a lot of terrible things that went on, not even related. I'm just talking about who she is as a person.
It came up in conversations directly tied to the Epstein network. People who claim proximity to these elite circles are describing something that sounds impossible until you realize how many separate voices are saying the same thing. Multiple accounts now describe Ellen as someone who didn't just attend the parties, but who participated in rituals designed to bind people together. A shared secret, a shared act so extreme that once you were in, you could never speak out.
There was a separate kitchen on her property.
You know what I think is funny right here? Watch this. He's actually referencing my video right here inside of his video. I think that's pretty funny.
Stainless steel, private entrance, no security cameras inside.
A private kitchen, no cameras, a personal chef who handled everything except the main course, which Ellen insisted on preparing herself, and witnesses describe her framing it not as something grotesque, but as something sacred, something ancient, something powerful. Now we need to talk about the part of this story that most channels won't touch, because beyond the rituals, there is a specific reason, according to multiple witnesses across different circles, why the most powerful people in Hollywood have been participating in these practices for decades.
Why?
It's not just about power. It's not just about control. It's about something far more primal. Youth. Jim Caviezel has spoken about a culture within Hollywood's upper tier.
Youth. Okay, so they're going to start talking about the sacrifice portion of this stuff, where that is going to bring you a youthful experience and give you an extended life.
A culture rooted in the belief that vitality can be literally consumed, that youth can be transferred, that there are biological properties in young human tissue that the ultra-wealthy have been quietly accessing for generations through channels that never appear in any public record.
She believed consumption was transformation, that youth could be taken in, that vitality could be absorbed. She talked about ancient rites, about elites throughout history who understood what the masses didn't.
Ancient rites, elites throughout history. This isn't a modern invention, and that's exactly the point being made here. The claim isn't that Ellen DeGeneres invented something new. The claim is that she was initiated into something very, very old, a tradition passed down through circles of power, a tradition that requires absolute secrecy and absolute complicity. And here's the chilling mechanism of how that complicity works.
Question. This is extreme. Talking about flesh, young flesh, consuming to revitalize your own youth. It seems so far out there and so conspiracy theory-like that it seems so hard to believe, but we keep hearing it. This is a reoccurring theme that continuously pops up to the point where we're starting to now believe it.
Once you participated, knowingly or unknowingly, you were bound, because what you had consumed made you as guilty as the person who served it. Nobody at that table could ever speak without destroying themselves.
He's talking about blackmail. Basically, when you go sit down at that table, you have that youth meet, we can call it. You're then part of the club. And then there is then blackmail against you. If that ever were to get out, you would be in massive amounts of trouble for doing it. So then Epstein or whoever else was in charge of this has complete control of you. They can completely blackmail you.
It's not just a social dynamic, that's an engineered trap. And it's been described by multiple sources as the single most effective way the elite class has protected its secrets for generations.
Once you shared that secret, whatever you believed you'd consumed, you are bound to the group. No one betrays a circle that can destroy them.
Read that again. No one betrays a circle that can destroy them. This is why Caviezel's 8-armed octopus metaphor is so precise. You don't just cut off an arm, you have to take the head. Because every arm, every individual in that network, is simultaneously a victim of the system and a protector of it. They are trapped, and they know it. And the people at the top designed it that way on purpose. Now let's connect this to the skin, because this is where the Epstein Island component ties directly into what witnesses are describing about Hollywood's anti-aging obsession.
This is exactly what I want to see. I want to take the details to the island and what was actually happening there.
Sources describing conditions on Epstein's island and in associated private estates across the United States have referenced procedures, treatments, things that happen to children on that island that go beyond in the conventional sense, things that involve the extraction of biological material, specifically from young bodies, for use in treatments designed to preserve the appearance and vitality of the adults who funded those visits. The mainstream medical community has begun openly discussing compounds derived from young blood.
This stuff clearly doesn't work, by the way, because if you look at the people, look at Ellen DeGeneres now, look at Epstein before he died, apparently died. None of them look youthful or young. They don't look young at all.
Adrenochrome-adjacent research, plasma transfusion trials, stem cell protocols as legitimate anti-aging science. What witnesses are describing is the black market version of that science, the version that doesn't require ethics boards or clinical trials, the version that requires an island with no cameras and a very short guest list.
I believe it's going to move a lot of whistleblowers to come forward, but not one. In the hundreds, maybe thousands of them worldwide start coming forward and telling the truth of what's really going on.
And you would think now, are people going to start coming forward now that the Epstein Files are so close to exposing everyone?
Hundreds, thousands, worldwide. That's not the language of someone talking about a small operation. That's the language of someone who knows the full scope and is bracing the public for what's coming. Let's go deeper on Oprah, because her role in this story isn't simply that of a wealthy person with suspicious associations. According to Jim Caviezel, her role is structural. She is, in his words, the gatekeeper. Think about what that actually means in practice. Oprah Winfrey has more cultural influence than almost any individual in American history. She has decided which books people read, which doctors people trust, which politicians people vote for.
Which doctors people trust, which if you remember John of God or whatever his name is, was sentenced to 100+ years in prison for taking advantage of his clientele that would come, where he was trying to transfer energy to them, and he was doing those through inappropriate acts with young girls from 6 years old, I believe it was, all the way to 69 years old. This was a doctor that Oprah Winfrey was referring many of her friends to, that I believe she even went to herself.
Which spiritual healers people follow, and which stories people never hear about. She put Harvey Weinstein on her arm at every major industry event for decades.
Massive pedo right there, taking advantage of so many girls in the industry.
She introduced him to young actresses. She lent him the most powerful social credential in Hollywood, her personal endorsement, at a time when dozens of women were already suffering because of him.
Oprah Winfrey there with him, who entered the room and was swinging off his arm and just seemed like a very dear friend. And these, like Oprah, Naomi, Rita, and Georgina, they all sat at his table. And for me, you know, meeting Oprah was like, oh my God, like I would have thought that I would have to be someone who's established, who everyone would have had to know about before I was privileged enough to meet someone like Oprah. So that gave me so much confidence.
So she was basically seeing that Weinstein was sitting at the table with all these people that she looked up to. He must be trustworthy. He must be someone that you want to identify with or be a part of inside of the industry, and then gets taken advantage of by the man.
in him at the time when he approached me.
That young woman trusted a predator because Oprah was standing next to him. That's not a coincidence. That's a mechanism. And whether Oprah knew exactly what she was enabling or not, at a certain point, ignorance stops being a defense and starts being a choice. She did the same thing with John of God, a Brazilian faith healer she promoted to millions of viewers across multiple appearances on her show. A man who was later convicted of serially assaulting dozens of women. A man whose background any basic researcher could have flagged in an afternoon. And yet Oprah gave him a global platform, a stamp of legitimacy, and access to her audience's trust.
Just go to bed, wear white, just wear everything is white, drink the water, take the herbs.
And then there's Diddy. Oprah was a fixture at his events. She was photographed, praised, celebrated in those circles. The same circles that are now the subject of federal investigations so serious they have shaken the entire entertainment industry to its foundation. Now let's be precise about what Caviezel is actually alleging here, because this is important. He is not saying Oprah is simply a person who made bad friends. He's saying she is a node in the network, a legitimizing force, the human infrastructure that makes systems appear safe, trustworthy, and even aspirational to the public. Harvey Weinstein, John of God, Diddy, Epstein's Files, the South African School. The pattern is identical every single time. Proximity, validation, silence, rebrand, and then, perfectly timed to redirect public attention, the philanthropy surge, the Maui fundraising, the Golden Globes speech about believing survivors, the Me Too pivot. Every time the heat gets close, Oprah doesn't run, she rebrands. She becomes the solution to the very problem she was part of creating. Now we need to talk about what happens to people who try to speak. Anne Heche was Ellen DeGeneres' girlfriend throughout the late 1990s. Theirs was one of the most publicly visible relationships in Hollywood.
Now remember, and he's probably going to reference my video again as he did in the start of this video, she died in a car crash. But before Anne Heche died, they were taking her in the ambulance, and she was in a body bag completely covered up. She sat up. And as that happened, they pushed her down and pushed her inside of the ambulance, and she never was found alive again. It was then said that she was being consumed by her ex-lover, Ellen. Let's see if they dive into my content there.
The time. Celebrated, photographed, put on magazine covers. The perfect progressive love story. But witnesses close to Anne in the years after the relationship ended described a very different private reality. Sources who claim to have worked alongside Anne on a documentary about child trafficking in a project called Children of the Machine have described her as someone who had witnessed things during her time with Ellen that she spent years trying to process. Things she could barely articulate. Things that, when she finally started putting them into words for the documentary, apparently made her a liability to very powerful people.
She didn't go through hell for nothing.
See?
We'll get it out there.
In August 2022, Anne Heche died following a fiery single-car crash in Los Angeles. The crash was spectacular. Her car traveling at high speed, slamming into a residential structure and erupting in flames. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of drugs in her system. The official conclusion was accident, but people close to Anne and sources within the documentary team have been vocal about their belief that the timing of that crash was not coincidental, that Anne had been getting too close to information that certain very powerful people needed buried.
That crash wasn't random. It was a hit to shut her up. And the poison started way before, in her relationship with Ellen.
Now, we are not stating this as confirmed fact. We are reporting what witnesses are saying, what the people closest to Anne believed in the aftermath of her death. And we are placing it in context, because when you understand the broader pattern Caviezel has been describing, the question of whether powerful people silence inconvenient witnesses stops being a paranoid fantasy and starts being a documented historical reality. Epstein himself died in federal custody. His death was officially ruled a His cellmate was conveniently transferred the night before. The security cameras outside his cell malfunctioned simultaneously, and the man who knew more names than anyone in the history of modern elite scandal took every single one of those names to his grave. That's the world Jim Caviezel is describing.
If he actually went to his grave. So his cellmate was removed, right? New cellmate. The cameras malfunctioned. There was an extra bodysuit walking around in the cells. So clearly something went on. The question is, was his life taken from him, or was someone else's life taken? Was he set free? And then everyone just think that he's dead when really he's alive somewhere in some island?
That's the world he's been standing in front of cameras talking about, at personal cost, at professional cost, at what he clearly believes is potential physical cost. Because Jim Caviezel isn't just exposing a past, he's predicting a future, and his predictions have been getting increasingly specific. At conferences across the country, gatherings of people who have been paying attention to the Epstein fallout, to the data, to the disappearing border children, Caviezel has been describing what he calls the event, a divine reckoning, a storm of all storms. He's positioning the Epstein documents not as an ending, but as a trigger, the last domino before a cascade of arrests, exposures, and institutional collapse that he believes is already in motion. And here's what makes that prediction impossible to simply dismiss. Over 300,000 children under 18 have been pulled into trafficking operations in the United States alone. Approximately 85,000 children who crossed the southern border in recent years have simply disappeared. No follow-up, no records, no answers from anyone in power.
85,000 children crossed the border this last year and disappeared.
Does this mean kids that are going on family vacations and things like that? Is that what they're talking about here? Do we need to be nervous, scared about going on vacations with our children?
Where did they disappear to?
Where did they go? That is not a rhetorical question. That is an open criminal investigation. And every name in the Epstein Files, every person on those flight logs, every attendee at those private dinners, every guest in those estate basements is a potential answer to that question. Caviezel has said publicly that he believes the saints themselves would want to be alive on this earth right now, because there are more souls to save at this moment in history than at any previous point in human civilization. That's prophetic language. That's the language of a man who genuinely believes he is standing at a hinge point in history.
I know that the saints in heaven wish to be on this earth right now because there are far more people on this earth than there's ever been. And there are far more souls to save right now than there has ever been.
And whether you share his spiritual framework or not, the facts underneath his fury are real. The files are real. The names are real. The missing children are real. The pattern of silence, complicity, and institutional protection is real. The question Caviezel is really asking, the one he's been asking since before most people were paying attention, is simple. And it lands like a verdict. They'd be in jail. But Oprah isn't in jail. Ellen isn't facing a public inquiry. The circles Caviezel is describing are still intact, still protected, still operating behind the same walls of money and media influence that have shielded them for decades. Jim Caviezel told us this film would move whistleblowers. He told us hundreds, maybe thousands would come forward, and slowly, painfully, at great personal risk, they are.
So the reason that these things aren't coming to light is because that the majority of the people that know the details are deeply involved in some way, having participated, whether they were knowing or whether they were not. Now, everyone that we spoke about inside of this video, Ellen DeGeneres, Diddy, Epstein, Oprah, I put out videos on all of them, and you guys should go check them out and subscribe.